is a true hero. Well, he will never admit that. He's a true hero in my book. Larry was a forward observer in Europe, also part of the Battle of the Bulge. He was in the Army, of course, and he had obviously one of the most dangerous jobs there was in the Army, the forward observer. The enemy obviously wanted to meet him, and not in a good way. So he was constantly evading the enemy there. But here to shed some light on some of the few things that he did and some of his great experiences, Larry Meyers, and thank you, Larry, for your service. Give him a warm Dorwood welcome.
What Neil said is very true. The life expectancy of a forward observer was in the 30 to 40 seconds, as I remember.
Well, he's 95, so he's...
Amen.
I don't know where to start, but let's say I got a limited amount of time, so that I can just say that it's only grace of God that I'm still here, because we faced a lot of troubles, and none of which were very comfortable. After about 3 months of time, they wanted to call everybody in and check to see if they had trench foot, because we were in the water most of the time, and we had no change of clothes or anything. So we got called into the aid station, and they took our shoes, and they looked at our feet to see if we had blue spots on it. I had one on my left foot, and they said, well, you just go in that barn and work until it disappears. So I worked pretty hard on that, and it got cleaned up. So they gave me a clean pair of socks, which was needed. One time when we were in combat, we were at close combat. We were shooting at each other, and this German came up there he had his rifle with his bayonet on it, and he was coming up toward me, and and all of a sudden my rifle went clink, and the clip fell out, and so I reached in my pouch and was going to put another one in, but it wouldn't go in. And so I wrapped it against the stock, and I pushed it back in and hurry up, got off a couple of shots before he got to me, which was pretty close. So other times, well, I'll just skip over a few of these. I was I had my OP on a hill overlooking a big valley, and all of a sudden a German plane came over and strafed the rear echelon. They didn't fire at me. I guess maybe they didn't see me, but then my driver came up to deliver some food for me and some meal, and I said, "You stay here." I says, I had a .50 caliber on my Jeep, and I said, "Load that .50 caliber, because that plane's going to come right back over us, and when he does, all you got to do is fire just ahead of him and just let him run through it." And sure enough, he came back. Excuse me. Got a runny nose. And he kept firing, and the plane ran through it, and all of a sudden it caught on fire, and the pilot landed the plane and got out, but the plane went up in smoke. So my driver said, I shot down one plane. And he was happy about being able to do that. Oh, let's see. One time we were on a night patrol. We were up on top of a big hill and toward the border of France and Germany. And we went out one night and do some reconnoitering about find out where the Germans were. And when we came back, we were just about back to the top of the hill, and all of a sudden, I fell inside of in the ground. I went down about 20 feet, and when I did, I fired my rifle. I always had my rifle with safety off when we were on patrol because that click in the nighttime, you can hear that for a long, long ways. So what happened? I walked one way, got my cigarette lighter out, looked around, was blocked that way. So I thought, well, I'll go the other way. I went the other way and I heard voices, and I stopped and listened. They were speaking the wrong language. So I went back to that hole where I fell in, and in the morning, the daylight, the guys that were with me came back to look and says, I heard a shot right about here. Well, I don't see his body. And I started throwing clods up and dirt up through the hole, and I said, look for a hole in the ground. And I kept throwing things up until they found me. And I said, now make that a little larger and shove one of those trees down there that's been blown off, and I'll climb out. So that's what they did. So I found out that I was in the Maginot Line, and I didn't like that introduction. Another time, we were sort of in a holding position, and Patton says wasn't allowed any add gasoline, so he couldn't move, so we had to stay where we were. But all of a sudden, the 1st Battalion started to move ahead, and they were in the woods about a half a mile away, and I could hear a lot of shooting in there, and all of a sudden, I got a call on the radio saying that they couldn't find the 1st Battalion forward observer, so could you go over and help them? I said, yeah, I know where they are. So I walked over the hill and down through a valley, and I got there, and there was they had some captives out there standing there, and they looked at me. They looked at me and they said, did you just walk through that valley? That's about what I understood from him. And I said, yeah, why? He says, you walked through our minefield. Well, I won't go back that way. So I went into the woods and up the hill, and they had a machine gun, and they were just blowing that machine gun back and forth across there, and what was happening is that they pinned guys down. You know, when you fall down on your face, you can't see anything ahead of you, but that helmet's blocking you off. And what they were doing is snipers were going up the trees and picking off the guys that were laying down that they could see. Well, I'm thankful there was a lot of underbrush that was pretty thick, so I worked my way down the hill so I could tell about where that machine gun was. So I called the guns, and I give them my coordinates. I says, give me a round of smoke, because I can't see anything else. It's too thick in here. So they shot a round of smoke, and they were pretty good, because it landed so close that one of the pots that came out of it rolled over and hit me in the leg. So I said, okay, now give me a round of high explosive about 20 yards to the north of me, and they said, you're nuts. He says, they can't, 20 yards, we can't guarantee that's going to come that close. Well, I says, all I want to pray is that it doesn't hit a tree. It's going to have a tree burst. So they fired, And sure enough, it came down and it missed me. And it went pretty close. And I said, now give me 2 more rounds and just add another 10 yards to the east. And they did, and that was the end of the machine gun fire. So I thought, well, I guess I'll go back to my battalion. And so I walked a long way back. I didn't go through the valley. Another time we were moved ahead, and we got stopped. It was starting getting dark, and everybody stopped. And the lieutenant set up his CP down in the basement of this one house that was where we were. There was a house and a couple of barns and outbuildings that were there. That's all that was there. And so I went down to see what they were going to do the next day, and I came back out, and just as I got out the door, I was shutting the door, and I heard an explosion, and I thought, what in the world happened? I walked around the edge of the house there, and here was a tank sitting there. Evidently, he had lowered his rifle and his 88 and put a shell right down in that basement. And here's a whole squad of German infantry, and I said, boy, where am I going to go? So there was a little barn, a little shed there, and I ran over to it, opened the door, and it was full of potatoes. And I went and dug in the back of the potato bin, and I hooked. I thought maybe they wouldn't see me in there. It was getting dark. And sure enough, they opened the door and looked in, shut the door, and went away. Well, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I thought, you know, in the morning when it gets light, they're going to find me here. So I said, I got to get out of here. So I got out of the potato bin, and I opened the door, and it was pretty dark. And I thought, I got a chance. I'm going to run down. There was a ditch down about 100 yards. And boy, I thought, well, if I make that 100 yards, I'll be all right. So I took off. As soon as I did, why, they were start shooting at me. Evidently, 1 or 2 guards were still awake. And I made it to the ditch. And I jumped in, and the other side of the ditch was a clump of trees, and I crawled out over that side. But I was kind of wet, so I I walked back toward the rear, and I saw somebody had a bonfire over there, and I thought, good, I'll go dry out. So I was over there drying out, and I pulled my clothes out, my pants back and forth, and the guy looked at me, and he says, you know what? I think you got a bullet hole through that pant leg. And I looked at it, yeah, I guess I do. I says, I'm glad I'm tall.
Hey, Larry, how were you chosen as a forward observer?
Well, that's a good story. I was a corporal, an instrument operator, and when we first joined them, I surveyed all the targets. They were on maneuvers, and they wanted somebody to survey the targets and the guns and stuff. So I did that. I originally had training in the artillery. I was in at Michigan State. I was in the national. The artillery in Michigan State. So when they said you could join the reserve and they wouldn't take you out in the middle of the term, I joined the reserve. Well, they didn't, because they just said, wait, at the end of that term, they says, don't re-enroll because we're activating the reserve. And so I got sent to Fort Bragg in artillery, and after that, it was, I had to make a choice of where I was going. they had us scheduled for replacements in North Africa, and I thought, boy, Rommel's not making a mess out of artillery in North Africa. And I had trouble with the heat anyway in Fort Bragg, and I said, I don't think I want to go there. So I looked to see what other options, and there was a option to go to school if you qualified, so I picked the test. And I qualified, and they sent me to the University of Maine to study engineering. Well, Marshall finally decided they didn't need as much engineers as they did cannon fodder, so they closed the school, and then they sent me to this 26th Infantry Division while they were on maneuvers. Well, while they were on maneuvers, I zeroed in on all the targets and sent that information back to the guns. And I went up to the forward observers and I was watching them, and there was one lieutenant there that wasn't doing very well. He had fired 10 rounds and didn't hit the target yet. And I made some comment that he ought to go back to school and learn how to. They didn't treat the cannon company as a artillery piece. They treated it as a mortar, and so the front line had to do all the calculations as to how to adjust the guns back in the rear to hit the target. And I thought, boy, that's a bad way, and that's not how the artillery does. So I talked to the captain afterwards, and he said, well, in between that, I made some comment, and that lieutenant wasn't very happy with me. So he says, here's the fire direction book. Now let me see you hit that target over there. And I thought, shall I do it or shall I not? I said, I think I'll try. So I put a round over and a round back, and I hit the target a third round, and I says, that's the way the artillery does it. And I handed the book back to him. And he wasn't very happy. Another time, we're approaching a new position, and my radio operator and I came through a bunch of brush and to an open field. It was going uphill there. There was nothing there. I says, we can't get up that way. And before I could say that, there was a mortar shell landed about 50 yards ahead of me. And I said, I went down, and I don't think he went down as fast as I did, because the next mortar shell landed between us, and it got him. So I took his radio off, and I carried him into the woods, and I found a Jeep, and I put him in the back seat, and I swiped the Jeep and took him to the aid station. Well, they looked him over, and they said, we can't do anything for him. That wasn't like the adjutant, but he had a piece of shrapnel through his head. So I went back to the captain, and I told him what happened, and he says, we still need a forward observer. So I said, okay, give me a radio and I'll find another way. So I took another radio and I went another way. It took me all the rest of the day to get on top of the hill where I wanted to get to, but I made it. Then, one night I couldn't keep my K rations down. I guess I ended up getting 2 days rations. They were all the same, and I think I got sick of them before I could eat that many. And so I went to the rear to find out if I could get something to calm my stomach down. In the meantime, the guy that was with me got captured. And when I came back the next day, he was gone, and I asked the infantry, what happened? And they said, I don't know. We didn't hear anything. Well, they were on a point a little bit ahead of the main part of the infantry was a good place to look out, but it didn't have any security. And the patrols came in and out of there. So they probably spotted these guys in the foxhole and took them captive. So the next day I says, okay, I'm going to stay here, but I want some security. So they said, okay, we'll give you 2 guys to stay with you tonight. And so I told these 2 guys, I says, well, I know this territory. I know what's up and down this hill, and I know where there's a cow over there. Don't shoot it. And I says, before you shoot anything, I says, I want you to come over and wake me up and tell me what you got. And so they, in the middle of the night, they come over and woke me up, and he says, there's crawling up the side of that other hill over there. I says, well, just a minute. So I got up, looked, I says, I don't think that's anybody. I think that's just some weeds blowing in the ground, in the wind. I said, you just hold everything and I'll go down there and find out. And so I went down there and kicked that clump of grass, and I came back up, and I was on my way back up, and I heard pop. I knew what that was. Somebody had dropped a grenade. And so I dove for the ground, and the grenade went off, and the guy says, well, I had it with the pin out, and I forgot, and I dropped it the side of my foxhole. Oh, I said, well, I didn't get hit, but that wasn't too good. When we got to the border, we were by the Saar River, and when we were by the Saar River, we had one row of buildings on the side of the river, on the enemy side of the river, and that was all. They were a series of apartment houses there, and so we thought we would put get an observation post. Well, the Germans were in the next building behind the apartment houses, so we were pretty close to each other. But I thought if I went up in the attic, I could take a tile off and have a place to look around. Well, there was a pillbox up on top of the hill about 1,000 yards away, and it would rotate, and there was an 88 fixed in there, and it would fire at us if they knew where we were. Well, they must have evidently spotted me, and they took that apartment house down with that 88, so I got evicted. So I moved to the next one, and I thought, well, maybe first of all, I said, I'm going to find one that already has that piece of roof missing, because we had shelled that place quite often and quite a little, and there was holes in a lot of places. And I found one that had a hole in it, so I thought, if I black out the background, they won't see me. So that was a pretty good place to observe, but my cannon company couldn't do anything in that pillbox. It was like a concrete pillbox, and so they pulled up a 155 long tom alongside of the next building and fired direct fire into that thing, and just like a carom coming off, that shell didn't do much more than chip the concrete. So they thought, well, the Air Force is going to have to take care of it. So a major come over and says, well, I understand you got a good observation point. I said, yeah, I do. I said, oh, right here. So he went upstairs with me to the attic, and here comes a P-40 with a bomb on it, a 500-pound bomb, going to hit that pillbox. And I looked up there at that plane. All of a sudden, that bomb was coming down. I says, that bomb's going to hit us. So I hit the stairways, and I ran down. I don't know how I got down to the basement, but I ended up in the basement when that bomb went off, and my blackout blanket that was for where we stayed at night, it was pasted to the ceiling, and I was sitting on my back in the basement. And I said, I don't know how I got down here, but it was okay. The bomb just missed us, and everything in that building was that was attached to the wall was off. It just popped everything off. The concussion, I guess, just took everything apart. And we were there for a while trying to figure out how to get through those to the other the guys in the other houses. We found out that they had all the doorways booby trapped, so we couldn't get in that way. So they thought, well, we'll put a charge against the wall and blow a hole in and get in that way. Well, that didn't work too well either. They blew the hole in, and the Germans would throw hand grenades out the hole. So they had to figure out another way. And so,
Larry,
yeah, I can ask questions, answer questions.
Larry, tell them about your run-in with the Russian soldiers.
Well, the Russians, when we ended up in Czechoslovakia and met the Russians there, and they one night Russians were getting drunk, I guess, and they came across the bridge to our side, and we told them to stop and go back, and this one guy wouldn't stop, and so we just shot him, and I told the Russians that we had shot one of your guys. What you want to do with him? He said, you shot him, you bury him.
First of all, Larry, thank you for your service. And could you tell us how old you were when you did all those things, and what unit were you in?
I was 20, about 20, I guess, when I did most of that stuff. And I was in the 26th Infantry Division. It was a National Guard outfit from Massachusetts. And they had been activated, and I joined them when they were on maneuvers and before they went overseas.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one. How'd you get in the middle of the cold winter there? How did you keep
You
warm?
froze. It was 7 below up in during the Battle of the Bulge. It was 7 below zero, and we had just our uniforms on and that big overcoat. And I had one blanket in my pack, and I laid that down on the snow and to keep dry. And you froze. It was terrible. You couldn't sleep more than 2 hours. If you did, you were dead. You just had to wake up and try to get on your feet again. You use your rifle to get you up, and you walk around for a while until the things you could feel your feet again. Yes.
What was the period of time from beginning to end when you were a forward observer over there?
Oh, let's see. Probably 6 to 8 months, or something like that. It wasn't too long. It didn't. We got in there in October, and it ended in the next May. But I wasn't forward observer right away. So that was probably another couple of months before I was forward observer.
Thank you.
How did you get to Europe from the States?
We were on a combat boat. We had 5,000 men on this boat, and they pulled into the channel by Cherbourg in the harbor. It was not cleared for any landing. So they put a rope ladder over the side of the boat, and we grabbed our duffel bags, our rifles, and whatever we had, and climbed down to a little landing boat there. And I thought, when they loaded it up, I thought, I hope they don't put any more in here, because the water was only about 6 inches from the top of the edge of that landing craft. And we just put over there, and they dropped the front end down, and we got out. We didn't have to walk through the water. They got up to the land. But that's how they unloaded that boat. It
Larry, tell
took
about
them
the
a long
minefield.
time.
Tell them about the minefield you had to walk through.
Pardon?
When you got off the boat, you walked through the minefield.
Oh, yeah, it was they had cleaned a path through the minefield on the surface there, and they had it roped off, and they said, just stay between the ropes, don't wander offside, because they haven't cleaned the mines off yet of the area. And one of the guys didn't believe that, and he saw some things over there he wanted to look at. Well, he didn't get very far before he tripped the mine and blew him up. And the first aid guy went out there to try to help him. He got it too, so we lost 2 guys, but just getting landing there.
That one?
Pardon?
What did you do with your life after you served?
What did I do afterwards?
Yeah, did you work, or what did you end up doing?
No, I went back to school to finish my education.
Michigan State.
I
I didn't know.
It was, I got back in January, and so I didn't go to school that time. My dad had, he was gonna build a new hardware store, and he bought a pickle factory, and I had the nice job of tearing that pickle factory down so they could clear the land to build a new hardware.
All right. Thank you, Larry.
Oh.